This is Shrofton. Second Manassas. The sun is coming from the east. It's going to set over there in the west. And behind us here is the south. North over there, the Potomac's up there. And what's happened here now is that we've come all the way from Richmond, Virginia, which is 100 miles away. We started in July, late July, early August of 1862, when Lincoln made a very bad mistake. He didn't follow McClellan's advice, probably because McClellan was too young and Lincoln didn't trust him. And he recalled McClellan from the peninsula. And while McClellan was attempting to remove his army back in front of Washington, Lee turned, and with Jackson in his van, immediately began to turn his attention on a second army that was in Virginia. It was along the line of the Rappahannock, and it was led by a guy named Pope. And Pope was not very bright in the end. He made some basic fundamental errors of judgment that permitted an understaffed, undermanned, under-equipped army that has barely formed itself into a disciplined fighting block of men to rapidly move half its force around his flank and come up into this area behind him. Now, we know from what we've seen that the head of Lee's army about 8 days ago slammed into the head of Pope's army just a little bit north of the Rapidan at a place called Cedar Mountain. And as the rest of Lee's army came up, Pope took a position behind the Rappahannock and turned his right flank inward, thinking that Lee would want to attempt to turn that flank by crossing the river and passing between his army and the Bull Run Mountain. And while Lee fainted at that idea, he sent Jackson much further up the Rappahannock to an obscure place that we've seen called Hinson's Mill, crossed it, rapidly moved through Orleans and through Marshall and Salem and the plains into the Thoroughfare Gap and back around behind us to Manassas Junction, and then having burned and destroyed that railroad depot, turned and he planted himself back up in these hills. His whole corps is up in that mountain, Sudley Mountain. They're about a quarter of a mile back up there in the woods, where there is a unfinished railroad cut, and they're lying in that cut. And from behind us and to the east is Pope's army. Pope's coming up from the south, and he's coming from the east, and he's looking for Jackson. And Jackson helps him because back down the Centerville Road behind us, Federal Division is marching, and Jackson on the 27th of August fires on this division and attracts the attention of Pope's army. And they come over here and they engage in a battle that goes on for about 48 hours. Meanwhile, following Jackson through Thoroughfare Gap is the other half of Lee's army with Longstreet. And they come up directly to the west, just past this hill. And incredibly, despite all the signs of Lee's presence on this battlefield, Pope ignores the reality that the Army of Northern Virginia has reunited itself. And on the 30th of August, Pope renews his attack, which comes sweeping across this field and into those woods. He's enfiladed by the entire artillery of Longstreet's corps. And after several, 4 or 5 attempts at regrouping and pressing on with the attacks, finally the Federal Army is completely shattered, and they reel backward back to the east, and they all converge on that stone bridge back there, and they fly back to Washington. Now, without this victory, which represents this movement of men 100 miles from the south, there could not have been 12 months later, actually 10 months later, in early July of 1863, a battle in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg.